Pod production.
Feeling good? Here we go.
Open Secret.
Hello and welcome to Open Secret, the power of open source intelligence. I'm Kylie Pert.
And I'm Jane Van Tienen. Thanks for joining us.
Today's guest is someone who's turned tracking stolen art into both a career and a calling. From bomb technician to art crime expert, Tim Carpenter's path is as unlikely as it is fascinating. Tim is a retired FBI Supervisory Special Agent and the former head of the Bureau's art crime team. Yes, that's actually a real thing. He's led recoveries of stolen masterpieces, tracked looted antiquities across continents, and investigated crimes that span from forgery and fraud to terrorism financing. To add a little colour, Tim's led some of the FBI's most iconic recoveries, from the stolen woman ochre painting by Willem de Kooning to the ruby slippers worn in The Wizard of Oz. And he headed the largest cultural property recovery case in the FBI's history, retrieving over 7,000 looted items from a single collector's stash. Today, Tim runs Argus Cultural Property Consultants, where his team helps governments, museums, and institutions around the world protect cultural heritage. And increasingly, that work involves open source intelligence. Think auction listings, satellite imagery, social media, and CCTV, all used to uncover the hidden stories behind stolen or trafficked art. This isn't the Hollywood version of art heists, but it's more fascinating and far more consequential. So whether you're into intelligence, integrity, or Indiana Jones, this episode is definitely for you.
Tim, it's great to have you join us on Open Secret. Welcome.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited.
Great. Well, Kylie and I are too.
Very excited.
Yeah, there's not much that fires up the collective imagination quite like a great art heist or an art crime story. I know that whenever I'm scrolling through Netflix trying to figure out what to watch next, whether it's a movie or a documentary or whatever, if I come across anything that's related to an art heist, you can bet your bottom dollar I'm clicking on that.
It's so true, right? It's fascinating because I travel a lot and I do a lot of lectures in my FBI career and of course now in my current career. But I would often joke, I would show up and I would talk about these things like, hey, if I came into an auditorium and I'm like, hey, I'm Tim Carpenter, I'm from the FBI. Do you want to talk about crime? No, right? Nobody wants to talk about crime. That's a snoozer, right? It's boring. Likewise, if I came in and said, hey, I'm Tim Carpenter from the FBI, let's talk about art. I'm going to get the same reaction, right? It's a snoozer, but something weird, fascinating happens when you come in and say, I want to talk about art, crime, right? That symbiosis between those two, it triggers something in people. They find it fascinating. It's not the run of the mill, right? Usually the subject matter is usually unique and people respond to it. Hollywood has responded to it.
I think so too. It sort of feels like there's something a little bit more refined about it, or at least just how we imagine it.
Well, let me just start by saying, don't believe what you see in the movies, right? That's not real.
It's a pretty good life rule, honestly. But before you dig too far into the art world, Tim, let's go back. Can you walk us through what it is that you do and how it is that you ended up here?
Sure. I'm the managing director of Argus Cultural Property Consultants. So I'm the founder of that company, but that comes from my previous career. So I had the distinct honor and privilege to run the FBI's art crime program for a number of years and supervise the art crime team from our headquarters in Washington, D.C. We had quite a bit of success and the program grew over the years. We branched out from kind of our roots, the traditional work, which was primarily related to theft cases, but that represented a fairly small part of our portfolio. Really what we started to find in the cultural property crime realm was a lot of work related to frauds and forgeries, but money laundering, antiquities trafficking, sanctions evasion, tax evasion, you name it, it's going on in the art crime, cultural property crime space. So we really kind of embraced all of those different trends and grew that program.
While you're on the topic of forgeries, Tim, I'm reminded of the time that I spent with the Australian government working as a diplomat in Washington, D.C. And I had the great fortune, actually, of visiting the FBI headquarters on numerous occasions. And I used to love attending one of the break rooms there in the headquarters building, and I spotted a wall of forged artworks seized in past investigations. I was fascinated, and I'm guessing now actually that you had something to do with that display.
Yeah, and thanks for bringing that up. What a great treat and honor that was. The space that you're talking about is kind of a breakout space. It's a meeting room. It sits adjacent to the Starbucks, right? FBI headquarters has to have a Starbucks.
Perfect.
Coffee is important.
And so you get your coffee and then you can go have your meetings in this breakout space. So that space was managed by the FBI Museum. They came to me later and they said, hey, we want to turn this space into this meeting room and we want to dedicate it to the art crime team. So they asked us to put together a collection of material that we had seized and collected over the years. Of course, it's difficult to put recovered evidence from a theft case in there because that's somebody else's property, right? We recover it, we return it to them. We're not going to keep that, stick that in our museum, right? But the fakes, of course, we do try to keep. One of the big things in a fraud case, if we're dealing with a fake, we try to recover that fake from the market stream. We try to remove it. That's not always easy to do. Surprisingly, some collectors, even when they learn that their $1 million artwork is fake and worth $10, they still want to keep it. And it's theirs.
They're almost as good, aren't they, sometimes?
For sure they are. And it's not illegal to possess a fake artwork. It's only illegal to intentionally defraud somebody, right? So when you purport that artwork to be authentic or original, that then becomes the fraud. Oftentimes, we find that people don't want to turn those loose. They didn't want us to seize them, so we would have to return them. But sometimes we were able to keep those artworks. And so we got a good collection of that together, and we chose some significant pieces and put them in there. And we brought in, I think, fake Stradivarius, and it's a great space. You got to go visit it.
Yeah, I can recommend. So, Tim, what got you from working in the art crime team at the FBI to where you are now? And how did that transition all go and what made you start Argus?
I suspect my trajectory was similar to yours. We're all ex-government employees for our respective work that we did. I won't speak for you, but I had 33 years of government service, so I was quite ready to retire from the government. I feel like I had done my time, right?
Done your bit, yeah.
But I wasn't ready to stop doing the work that I was doing.
Yeah, what you love, yeah.
Right, we love it. We do it because we like it. My team, the art crime team, our family, the old timers that were matriculating out, we were all hitting our retirement age. It's like, well, we really want to keep the band together. Of course, well, we form our own company and we just do what we've been doing.
Mm-hmm.
Only now we can take the handcuffs off, right? We don't belong to the bureaucracy anymore, so we can maybe be a little more effective.
Oh, I really hear that. The impact that you can have from the outside, especially on some of the big threats that you dealt with on the inside during federal service, can actually be just as impactful or just as strong. In fact, sometimes even stronger, because you're no longer working within the bureaucracy, but you're still contributing to the greater good.
Yeah, I mean, that's the nature of working in any government organization. It is a bureaucracy, right? There are rules, there's bureaucratic red tape, there are decisions that are going to be made that you don't agree with. That's natural, right? Those things happen. And sometimes they help the work that you're doing, and sometimes it hinders the work that you're doing, right?
Absolutely. So I'd love to pivot now to the crime itself. When we think about art crime, I think most people like me immediately picture paintings by the grand masters. You know, those big, iconic masterpieces by, I don't know, Renoir, Monet, Van Gogh, all of that. But those seem like they'd actually be incredibly hard to move, even on the black market. So when we are talking about art trafficking, what kind of art are we actually talking about?
You've kind of hit the broad strokes of it, right? I think most people, naturally, their mind goes to the big masterpieces, right? The Van Goghs and the Monets and those things that get stolen. In reality, jewelry, right? Because of pop culture, our mind naturally goes to the big kind of Hollywood-esque heist stories, right? That's what you think of in terms of art crime. I bet in truth that represents an extremely small part of the portfolio. And there's a reason for that. If you steal the Mona Lisa, like Perugia did in 1919, if my memory is right, it becomes pretty hard to move that, right? If you're a criminal and you steal something, you probably steal it because you want to monetize it. There's an end game. You want to convert that thing into money. Everybody on the planet knows that painting, and everybody on the planet's going to know it was stolen within minutes of it being stolen. So how hard does it become to move it? And if you can move it, you're going to move it in the criminal space, right? You're going to move it in the black market space. Well, do you think a criminal is going to pay you market value? No. Right? This is the fallacy of art criminals, right? Oftentimes they don't fully understand what they're doing, and they think they get these multi-million-dollar pieces, and then I'm going to go out and sell it for $10 million. No, you're not.
And why is that?
Well, you have to possess good title. If you want to get market value on something, you have to own title. If you don't own good title, it's worthless, or it's worth pennies in the black market to another criminal. So that's one of the big fallacies for art crime, right? Particularly in terms of the theft issue. But to really answer your question, right, art crime and trafficking, what we really mostly see and we refer to is the lesser known stuff, right? That's where the real criminality exists, is in the low to middle tier. Those unknown artists, not the $10 million painting. The $10 million painting is extraordinarily difficult to move. But that $20,000 painting, that's pretty easy to move, right? Because we don't have the resources to track that kind of stuff.
And there's many more of them. Would that be right as well?
For sure.
So, yeah,
For
that's
sure.
right.
Lesser known pieces, they're going to traffic in the tertiary and secondary auction markets, right, that maybe don't do necessarily the same due diligence that some of your primary auction market houses might, or your primary market collectors, right? Your kind of top tier collectors that do employ due diligence practices and, they do some research. But if you're a low tier collector, maybe you're not asking questions, right? Maybe you don't want to know the answer. So that's where we see most of the crime occur, right, is in that low to middle range, right? So trafficking, we're really primarily talking about antiquities. There's a lot going on with antiquities, a lot in the numismatic community, buyer beware.
And numismatics involves coins or currency and things like metals. Can you give some other examples, Tim? What are some of the main antiquities that are stolen these days?
That's a big question. Suffice to say, there's archaeological material, there's antiquity in every square inch of the globe. They have historical treasures, historical resources that warrant protection and can be monetized and marketed, right, by people that deal in illicit trafficking. But basically 3 categories of country when we look at that, right? We have source nations. Source nations are where the antiquities are uncovered. You have then transit countries. Your dealers and your buyers tend to locate. And then you have consumer nations. So source nations, transit nations, and consumer nations. So like the United States, by and large, is a consumer nation. We are, in fact, the largest consumer nation in the world, not only for legal cultural heritage, but also illicit cultural heritage. We are also, in our own way, a source nation because of our trade in Native American antiquities. So there is some trade domestically within the United States and Native American community, but by and large, we see that material leaving the United States for markets in Europe and Asia.
Interesting.
So in every corner of the globe where you have a source nation, whether it's Vietnam or it's Syria or it's Sudan, right? In a little more modern context, Sudan is a hot spot, Ukraine, that material will have a natural trafficking route to go to the markets that want that material.
Gee, it sounds like a tangled web with lots of players involved. So when you're investigating trafficking, who is it that you're really focused on and why?
Sure. But let's be clear. I'm going to talk from the Tim Carpenter perspective on this.
Mm-hmm.
Target the deal makers. That's where the valuation starts, right? If we think about cultural property as a commodity, who sets value? Is it the looter on the ground? Is it that villager who's subsistence looting? Because that's the reality. Most looters are subsistence looters. They're looting to feed their families, right? This is just their local trade. It's how they make money. Mm-hmm. Do they set value? And the answer is absolutely not. Collectors largely don't set market value. Collectors are the consumer. Most collectors are good faith buyers. They might be ignorant good faith buyers at times, right? They intentionally don't ask questions because they don't want to know the answers, but most are ethical and good faith buyers. They don't know that the object that they're buying was sourced illegally, right? They don't know that this was a looted piece. I say collectors aren't really my problem. My problem lies with the middlemen, with the dealers. That first point of sale from the looter to the dealer, usually after it crosses a border and it goes into that transit stage, that transit country. Those are the market makers. Those are the people that are setting the price. So you'll have that transitor in your transit country. Then you'll have a dealer who wants to take that piece to market. So that dealer is going to buy that piece at reduced value from the transitor, but then they're going to sell it onto the market at market value, right? So it's really those unscrupulous, unethical dealers that are setting the market value. That's where I think most of your enforcement activity has to be aimed in that direction.
Although some people would say if nobody was buying it, there's no demand, then the commodity chain sort of dries up, doesn't it? And then you would be able to just dust all the pieces off and put them back where they belong. But I think that's probably a bit naive.
Maybe.
So what you're saying is targeting the middleman, get most bang for your buck.
It's a nice idea, right? It's a nice idea.
Yeah.
There'll always be somebody that wants to buy it.
Yeah.
Human beings are fickle in this way. I mean, no offense to anybody, but I usually use diamonds as my example. Yeah. Why do we assign value to diamonds?
Because they're pretty.
If it's just merely aesthetic, well, I can do the same thing with a $10 piece of glass. It's effective marketing. What I'm trying to say is there will always be buyers. It's easy to convince human beings that something has value when it really doesn't have value. If you don't believe me, go to an auction at Sotheby's or Lloyd's or Christie. Go pick your auction house and go and watch an auction on ancient Grecian material, right? And see what people will pay for a chunk of marble. People will spend money on the craziest things. And so there will always be a market.
And more specifically, I'm hearing what you're saying is about the value of antiquities going back since the dawn of time. The Greeks, the Romans, Napoleonic Wars. People want things that don't necessarily belong to them or that are beautiful or that they've assigned value to for multiple reasons. And therefore, there's a market there.
You've hit it right on the head. Looting of cultural heritage is the oldest form of property crime in human history.
And it's not stopping.
It'll never stop. The winds are shifting a little bit, right? I've been pleasantly surprised over the last 7 or 8 years to see that there is a shift societally in how we view cultural heritage and view our obligations to protect it.
That's a good thing.
20 years ago, it was very different. Now it's been social justice movements sweeping across the globe, and that has fueled awareness that, maybe we shouldn't do this anymore. Maybe it's not great to exploit somebody's cultural resources and monetize those and steal them and loot them. And so I do think private collectors and institutions both are waking up to this and approaching this problem from a more ethical standpoint. They're trying to address their ethical collecting practices.
But it's a tough nut to crack, isn't it? On one hand, you've got institutions and private collectors who've operated in a certain way for decades. On the other, there's growing pressure for transparency, restitution, and respect. That's not just a policy shift, it's a mindset overhaul. And the tradecraft, it's forensic. Provenance research means piecing together fragmentary records, oral histories, export permits, even old photos and shipping logs to build a credible chain of custody, all while contending with a global market that thrives on loopholes and the commodification of culture. It's a persistent, complex threat. Beyond the research, you're navigating legal grey zones, shifting norms, and political undercurrents that shaped how these objects moved or were taken across borders. It's part investigation, part diplomacy, and a whole lot of cultural intelligence.
Well, every army in the history of armies, since human beings have gathered into groups, has plundered and looted cultural heritage through conquest. They all do it. They do it today. It's happening as we speak in Sudan and Ukraine. It happens in every conflict. And those pieces eventually find their way into the market stream. They're usually sold, resold. You get good faith buyers. The laws are different in every country. Like in the United States, we have this general concept under property law that bad title can never pass. So if an object is stolen, it's always stolen until returned to its rightful owner. That doesn't exist all over the world. Some other countries adopt that same concept. Some don't. Some countries will have different rules that say, well, if the original owner doesn't come forward and file a claim within a certain time period, say 5 years, then title transfers. Well, that gets really legally complex, right? When you start trying to peel this onion apart and figure out, well, is it legal? Is it not legal? You have to understand the entire history of that object, right? And where it's been. It's really complex quickly.
So if we're talking about tradecraft here, I'd love to dig into the mechanics a little bit. What are some of the methods these traffickers are using today to loot, smuggle, and launder antiquities, especially in conflict zones or unstable regions? And on the flip side, what kind of tools, techniques, or investigative strategies are you and your teams using to stay ahead of that? How do you catch them when they're deliberately working in the shadows?
Yeah, look, there are a number of tools, right, that we use to peel back that onion, to look at trafficking patterns and understand who the perpetrators are. We have our traditional methods, right, our traditional law enforcement, national security methods that usually involves a civil or criminal process of some sort. But increasingly, especially these days, the uptick of digital life that we have in the world, right? We too have relied more heavily on open source intelligence. I mean, that's just the way of the world. To your question, if you're looking at trafficking of antiquities, let's look at Al-Qaeda's looting of Palmyra in Syria. Pretty well documented site, pretty well documented over the time of the looting process. You can look at all the satellite imagery, and we generally kind of know what came out of that site. And so as those pieces enter into the market stream, it doesn't take long for subject matter experts to identify those pieces as potentially problematic, that might have come from this site or that site, right? So it gets challenging. And so people that traffic in illicit antiquities have to rely on non-traditional marketplaces. There are social media marketplaces that exist. They tend to be nomadic. They'll occupy a market space for a while. And when that space grows and gets too big, as people enter into that space, then they'll move and then they'll start over, right? And they'll rebuild that market space. So part of our process, of course, is data mining those open market spaces, tracking, understanding who's driving those marketplaces, who's participating. That helps us develop intelligence and investigative leads on maybe who our targets might be.
What about the dark web, Tim? Is that used in art crime as well, or is it just all happening out there in the open on the surface web?
That's a great question, Jane. Early on, many of us in law enforcement were struggling with that. It was a bit of a learning curve to catch up to that. And so early on, I think we all kind of generally assumed, we're definitely going to see a ton of antiquity trafficking going on the dark web. They sell everything else there, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Guns, bullets, drugs, people, like anything you want, you can get on the dark web. So we just naturally assumed that we would see this massive trove of antiquities flooding into the dark web. So of course, every agency on the planet starts looking into this, right? We start doing analysis, we start data mining, tracking these things. And what we found was, not so much. You're trying to monetize this commodity at market value.
That's right. You're going to lose a lot if you go there, aren't you?
Well, who operates on the dark web?
The baddies. Criminals.
Baddies, the baddies, they operate on the dark web, right? So if you're traversing the dark web marketplaces, you're selling to other criminals. Other criminals can't be trusted. And so what we found, again, there are no absolutes in anything. I'm not saying you won't ever find antiquities trafficking in the dark web, but we didn't see what we thought we were going to see. What we found is that most of the stuff traversing the dark web was fake.
That makes complete sense, really, when you think about it, doesn't it?
It does make sense. And it took a moment for all of us for the little light bulb to go off and go, I wouldn't expect these authentic pieces to move in that space. The dark web exists for those commodities that have no legal market.
So is there an elitism as well? This is a funny question, but I've been wondering it because you tend to think of art and antiquities as kind of an elitist kind of thing.
Yeah, you really do.
Right? So is there an element of that in this as well, that the people who deal in this type of commodity are like, I'm not going to go there with the drugs and the real dirty underworld? I mean, maybe the middleman is maybe different, but what about the buyers?
The art market, the antiquities market for sure, has a very small cadre of expertise. It has historically been, I'm going to say opaque, and that's being generous, right? It's been nearly non-transparent, right? The art market operates in secrecy. It's one of the last unregulated markets on the planet. And so if you want to be successful in the market and you want to successfully move pieces within the market, particularly at market value, which is the goal, you have to be connected and you have to know people. People who know people don't go to the dark web, right? Like, that's not where you conduct business. I'll share a very quick story. One of my early art cases in Miami, I got a phone call one night at 2:00 in the morning by our FBI dispatcher who was on the phone with Miami-Dade Police Department's dispatcher, and they're looking for the art crime guy. So they wake me up at 2:00 in the morning and they're like, there was just an armed robbery of $1 million painting. And I'm half asleep and I wake up and I'm like, okay, wait a minute, say that again. And they're like, it was 2:00 in the morning and there was just an armed robbery of $1 million painting. And I was like, it's not realistic. Nobody does legitimate deals of $1 million artworks at 2:00 in the morning in the parking lot in the boot of a SUV, which is the story that happened in this case. Like, come on, guys, this is ridiculous. This is not a real robbery because nobody who operates legally in this space is going to do this.
So does that mean their tradecraft is better, or that they understand that if they're operating in this world that it needs to be a cut above because got the risk of getting caught or the risk of even being successful in making money is more difficult?
I'm going to give you some massive credit here, Kylie. I think you might have just asked me the best question anyone has ever asked me on art crime.
Thanks, Tim. Oh, I'm excited about that. It's because I like to get into the mind of the adversary and understand them.
Is their tradecraft just better? Probably. Yeah, probably. I've never considered that question. That's a great question. But I think the answer might be maybe their tradecraft is better.
It strikes me that you've got a lot of this complex tradecraft happening, but there's still some of that old-fashioned stuff that actually opens the door. I was reading something somewhere, in fact, Tim, it was probably written by one of your former FBI colleagues, I suspect, where they were saying that around 80 to 90% of museum art thefts are actually inside jobs. Does that line up with your experience too?
That's fairly accurate, but understand that's an FBI statistic, so we're predominantly quoting American museum heists. Tend to happen out of collection storage space, not off the gallery floor, right? So it's just fascinating because most of your museum security is aimed at the gallery space. Very little security is aimed at the storage space. So there is a bit of a difference between what we see in the United States to what we might see in Europe. Europe, we tend to see much more of the brazen Hollywood-esque kind of daytime heists. Not to suggest that it never happens in the United States. We have some notable examples within the US, but it's pretty rare for us.
Listening to you, it really hits me about right across art crime investigations and security vulnerabilities like insider threats. Open source intelligence really does have a critical role to play.
Oh, for sure. Those intersections just increase year by year. Everybody relies on their mobile devices. And as you know better than anybody, that leaves traces, right? Footprints and fingerprints everywhere now in the digital world. It provides additional tools in intelligence for us to develop cases.
It's not just governments or big organizations using these tools or techniques anymore, is it? In some cases, the public really gets involved too, especially in crowdsourcing efforts to track and recover looted artifacts. That public side of the story actually really interests me.
Many countries have stolen art databases. They all vary in some ways. They all are similar in some ways. You know, in the United States, the FBI maintains the National Stolen Art File, which is the only law enforcement database in the United States to track stolen art. It does not necessarily track antiquities, though, especially when you consider that most of these antiquities are what we would call orphaned objects. And so that's a term we use to refer to an object that was looted from the ground. But the problem with an orphaned object is it's undocumented, right? It's not part of a known collection. A lot of work that has to go into identifying and attributing an orphaned object that comes out of the ground from a looter pit because they're not previously known.
Do you have anything you could speak to there to help the listeners understand that once you've got an antiquity and you're looking to label it and put it into being recorded and having a new path to follow from there, how that might happen and how you do that?
There are some pretty fascinating tools that are in development right now. Really, the goal here is to use blockchain technology or blockchain type technology to fully document and trace provenance, right? So provenance is the history of an object, right? It's ownership history. You remember a minute ago I was talking about on the open market for market value, you have to have good title. That's one piece. The second piece is you have to have provenance. You have to have documented, solid provenance, right, in order to sell that piece. So that's why the blockchain technology is so fascinating, because for the first time in history, we have a way to digitally track these things and not rely on analog letters and oral history and all of these other things that might come into play. The blockchain technology is really fascinating. There's some technology emerging where you can just take a photograph with your smartphone, your device, and it maps, something like 2 million data points on this image, and it will basically give that thing, that object, a digital fingerprint. And then it goes into this kind of blockchain style technology to where now you can track that for its life cycle.
And I also read do the transactions and the contracts as well through the blockchain of the selling of the item or moving of the item.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's really fascinating technology. It's intimidating to me because
it is me too. Don't worry.
What are we talking about? But I think, it's a great tool that's going to help drag some of this opaqueness in the market into the light and make it more transparent. But let me also say with any tool, right, criminals will find ways around it.
Do you think it will change the adversary in terms of if it becomes highly technological? Does that change the nature of the art heist, if you will?
Yeah, when the NFT market exploded, we were really looking at NFTs and how does that transform the market and transform the work we were doing as the FBI art crime team. Technology adapts, criminals adapt their methodology to make use of that new technology, which then triggers law enforcement to have to catch up, right? It's usually what happens. We're rarely ahead. We're normally behind, but we always do catch up. And then things shift and we just play that cat and mouse game over and over.
It's clear that technology is changing the way criminals operate and, how investigations keep pace too. In a conflict like Ukraine, how is technology shaping what we know about cultural looting? And how is your team approaching those investigations in active, really unstable environments?
You've already touched on one of the important pillars, I think, of our thought process and our methodology, and that's crowdsourcing. So if you look at a region like Ukraine and you examine the looting that's going on, which much of it is state-sponsored looting, crowdsourcing becomes pretty critical because we don't necessarily have friendly government or military units on the ground documenting. So that can be rather difficult to figure out what was in an institution, understanding what they had in their collection in the first place, and then trying to identify what was taken and where it was taken to. So we have to rely on crowdsourcing quite a bit for that, right? So the local populace are documenting these looting activities via their mobile devices. So things that they post on social media, things that go up on websites and online, having access to that data and being able to scrape all of that is critical to building out that right intelligence picture to understand the movements of these pieces and who's perpetrating these thefts.
Tim, in one of our earlier conversations when we were preparing for the podcast, you mentioned that things like Ring cameras or doorbell footage and CCTV, all of that kind of everyday tech that we take for granted now, or the Internet of Things, as sometimes we call it, that kind of data plays a role here too, doesn't it?
Yeah, all of that stuff becomes critical. A lot of ways it's making things a bit easier. Fortunately, we didn't have this ability to do that. We had to do the traditional gumshoe method, as they used to say, right? Now we can rely on these data scrapes, right, and pull stuff down off the white web.
It's labour intensive though, Tim. I'm assuming like most of the intelligence space, but as a company now and not as government, how does collaboration work for you in terms of helping with that burden, acquiring information, but also in terms of managing the volume and prioritising the work?
As you probably both know, once you leave government service, you're kind of out. We have to develop that collaboration. Thankfully, within my role with the art crime program, we enjoyed a wide collaboration as it is. We didn't just rely on government sources and government partners. We have to work with academia. We work with private collectors, museums, institutions. But for sure, collaboration is key. It's the only thing that makes us successful. Yesterday, I was in a meeting related to some of the trafficking issues that are going on in Sudan. That's kind of largely a black hole, right? There's not a lot of international presence in there because of the civil war. It's been a pretty difficult conflict region. So there's quite a bit of good activity going on, but there are still some intelligence gaps that are occurring in Sudan that we just don't have the best understanding of what the status of some of their cultural heritage collections are. So we have to rely on that collaborative effort with some of our non-governmental organization partners, with people that are on the ground that can deliver ground truth to you.
Tim, I'm curious, do you see crossover in the patterns or tactics used across different trafficking types? For example, are there similarities between antiquities trafficking and what we see in, say, human trafficking or drug trafficking? Do insights from those other areas help inform your approach to tracking cultural property crime?
Yeah, broadly, anyway, I'll address that broadly just by saying that you don't believe that antiquities traffickers only traffic in antiquities, do you?
Well, I sort of was for a minute there. I was thinking of some guy in a suit who's got his blockchain.
Oh, right.
Oh, Pierce Brosnan.
Thomas Crown Affair? No.
We haven't encountered Pierce Brosnan many times. No, listen, they're smugglers, right? These are traffickers. They smuggle and everything. And so, of course, we have to look at, whether it's narcotics trafficking or human trafficking, they're engaged in all of that.
Might give some hints as well to the networks and the modus operandi and that type of stuff.
Sure, and particularly with their smuggling routes and trafficking routes that we want to focus on. But no, that's funny. I usually have a PowerPoint slide I'll show where I like to poke fun at the Thomas Crown Affair and the Pierce Brosnan image, right? Because that's what pop culture will tell you is the art criminal, right? The art thief is a eccentric billionaire, but that's not reality, right?
It's funny, isn't it? Like the movies give us cat burglars and museum heists with all of the special effects. But actually on the ground, it's a little lot less Ocean's 11, unfortunately. But what are the real trends that you're seeing now, Tim? Is it still big art heists or are you seeing something different?
So fraud is always the big ticket item. I'll speak for the FBI's art crime team. When I was running the program, I would say that accounted for, I'm going to guess, about 50% of our portfolio was related to fraud in some way, fakes, forgeries, other fraudulent schemes. But I think we were mostly focused on complex criminal enterprise investigations, so kind of hearkening back to the organized crime, the mob stuff. But really these days it's been money laundering and sanctions evasion.
Can you speak a little about the sanctions evasion?
You take a country that has sanctions, right, particularly in the United States, that might sanction them. They're still trying to move money into the American market in some way, move money into the American market or move money out of the American market in some way or fashion. Well, they can't rely on traditional banking structure anymore because they have sanctions. So if you're a Russian oligarch and you want to move large amounts of money, what better vehicle than one of the last unregulated markets on the planet than to do so in the art market?
It's a powerful reminder that art isn't just about beauty or culture. It's also deeply connected actually to money and power and influence. Before we close, Tim, is there anything that we haven't touched on already that you would like to share with our listeners?
The successes that we had as a program in the FBI weren't because of any one person. They were because of the team. Like with any successful program, we just had an amazing cadre of dedicated professionals that believed in what we were doing. And that's not always the case. You might imagine within law enforcement circles, art crime may not be super high on the priority list for some folks. And so my job was always to try to convince everybody else why we do the work, because it's important, right? Protecting our global culture heritage is important. It's who we are. You may not realize it consciously how important it is, but it's super important to our shared human identity, right? To have this culture and this history, and it's our job to protect it. I always give a shout out to my team and talk about just how amazing they were and how dedicated they are. I'm fortunate that I brought a few of those along with me in my company now. So just as proud of them now. We have a great team. They persevere, even when we don't necessarily get the support that we want, and just look at their accomplishments. They speak for themselves, right?
Oh, they sure do, Tim. Thank you so much, not just for this conversation, but for reminding us that art connects us to our shared identity and that safeguarding isn't just important, it's actually essential to our humanity. It's been a real privilege having you join us today. Thank you.
You've been listening to Open Secret, the power of open source intelligence. Open Secret was created by Kylie Pert, Amanda Shane, and Jane Van Tienen. A podcast by OSINT Combine. Make sure to visit our website, osintcombine.com, for information on how OSINT Combine can help you find, analyse, and act using open source information. Open Secret is recorded on the lands of the Cubby Cubby people. OSINT Combine acknowledges Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples as the first Australians and traditional custodians of the land where we work, live, and learn.
A Tribute Pod production.